Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another dev stream of Ye Old Xibalba. We've been doing this for, I want to say, at least a month now, working on the tech maps specifically, and it has indeed taken an interesting shape. We'll be back with the Keltar momentarily. I don't have too much to show off until then. I'm pretty sure, in fact, that absolutely nothing of significance has occurred since the previous little bits of work here and there, bits and bobs, Zerg here, and all that shit. I'm pretty sure I'm pretty sure there's absolutely nothing different about Antikythera since the previous stream that I did. And to prove my point, I'm gonna boot this up right in front of all of you. I'm gonna spend a bit of time grabbing some units, and I'm gonna start moving them around. And it's a bit weird because last time I was moving them around, they were definitely breaking a lot. And yeah, it's a bit weird. It's a bit weird that they move around terrain as if it were an object. That's pretty strange. It's definitely what happened with a building. Oh, look, they're moving around the building. That's very strange behavior, guys. I don't know why something like this would have happened at all. To be honest, I'm pretty surprised that our units actually are moving around and navigating. It's almost like we're trying to get them to go down a specific path, and it's almost like they're finding the path. It's almost like they're pathfinding. It's not perfect by any means. You can see some units are getting stuck over there. And it's certainly, welcome. It's certainly not final, and it is very clumpy. But we do indeed have some element of finding pathways, which is pretty epic. So I will be just sat here very, very happily, enjoying the fact that there is early draft pathfinding occurring in the game. And shout out to Veek for that one. So there you go. That's the update. Hats off. Big smooch. Big thanks. Big man. And that'll bring us to the work that we'll be doing today. We'll fire up Ye Old Visual Studio Code, and we'll take a look at what we got in the Keltar department. So no changes since the previous stream. We obviously had the turret and the Earth Mound, totem and the Earth Mound. I think these are fairly solid, fairly standard fare. So I think it's time to start asking ourselves that big question about how the Keltar are going to progress up their tech trees. So if you're a long-time viewer or you've read up on the Keltar description, you'll note that they had something called combat-based tech progression with body count requirements. So in this stream, we'll be trying to finalize those specific elements and get them into a quantifiable state, and also settle on a prospective conceptual implementation that won't break the RTS mechanics and won't stray too far from convention, we could say, because we still want players to be playing the RTS game. So when I was coming up with something about combat-based tech progression, I was thinking about how, what would really allow me to reinforce the theme of the Keltar, and what would allow me to still provide competitive sort of angles, and you could say a sort of counterplay to other regencies. And I can't just make it so that they have access to all tech as soon as their body count requirements are up. There's probably got to be some sort of tech structure or something that sort of manifests that and that carries out these rituals and ceremonies, I guess you could say. Because originally it wasn't called combat-based, it was called ceremonial tech progression, which I think is kind of funny. So our first order of business will be to create the tier 2 tech structure. Or it's not, I suppose it could be considered a tier 1 structure now that I think about it. And it will essentially be this ceremonial hall. And I'm thinking that each ceremonial hall that is tasked upon individual situations, basically different categories, will provide you with different unlocks. So it's not just that, tier 2 tech is unlocked in all capacities. It will actually be related to whether or not certain things fit specific archetypes. So the bloodline is going to probably require. My current thinking is that there will be 3 distinct sets of ceremonies that will be carried out. One of them will be related to infrastructure. One of them will be related to the Ironclad branch. And another will be related to the Warwing branch, with the Bloodline branch of tech ascending based on at least having tier 2 access in any of the other branches. Now, I might decide to change that up and make it so that infrastructure is unlocked incidentally and Bloodline is specialized. But the initial concept that I had was that you would basically have some sort of segregation between utilitarian, defensive, and aggressive, offensive options. So those 3 elements, offensive, defensive, utilitarian, would be the way that you would separate out the tech while still generally benefiting in a more everyman style, well-rounded style fashion, which is where I thought Bloodline would make sense to get unlock alongside everything else. So I will have to think about exactly what that pertains, how that pertains to the progression. So let's get an initial implementation up, conceptually that is, and then move forward. What's up, Veek? You missed my epic meme about pathfinding earlier. You should check that out at some point when you have a chance. So the body count requirements essentially are, aggressive or defensive. Did you lose enough units to manifest the defensive capabilities? Did you slay enough enemies in order to manifest the aggressive? Oh, you're playing Birthday Map 2 and you're winning. Wow, you're finally trying to defeat the Lost Hand of God. That's crazy. Shout out to One for the Future, the birthday campaign. Available wherever Cosmonarchy is sold. So, Avik brings up a point about how maybe there should be some sort of infrastructure-based technology that, maybe there should be an element where you're improving. See, the initial concept that I had was basically that the body count requirements would unlock defensive options if you were losing a lot of units and offensive options if you were slaying a lot of units, almost like a win more style of approach. But I'm wondering if that binary isn't too disinteresting. I also don't really think, though, that separating it based on tech branch makes a huge amount of intrinsic sense either. It fits into the tech branch idea, but I don't know that it... I'm not actually sure. I'm wondering now if maybe the ceremonial hall thing could be one of those situations where you build more ceremonial halls, and again, that's just like the catch-all term for the structure. And the ceremonial halls are tasked onto a specific branch, if you will. And I guess it could be broadly seen as, you can tech up faster if you lose units or something. Like you get, say, if you can consider it like a progress bar, percentage bar out of 100. Maybe each Keltar unit you lose is worth 2 points, and each enemy you slay is worth 1 point. That wouldn't really make sense, but if we go with that as a general idea, like that could be one way that we could conceptualize it. That way, instead of unlocking defensive options based on losing units and having that built-in comeback mechanic, you instead simply tech up in general. So, and it would kind of solidify the idea that units matter more. The Keltar units matter more than enemies. So your own units matter more than enemies. So enemies, no matter what, don't really matter as much. Now, obviously, this poses a problem for when you have a regency like the Rune, or the Orlithray, or the Rosellium, where there's a lot of units. And those, if each one of those units gives a flat bonus towards this, and it is just number of enemies slain, that allows Keltar to actually snowball quite intensively. Now, I think there is still a limiting sort of check and balance here with the resource costs of these, where even their units cost a lot of money. But it is still a little bit weird that, picking Keltar into a regency that trains less units or trains more units, depending on that situation, they would actually have less or more or less speed. Now, I mean, you could do weight if you wanted a different mechanism for it. Obviously, supply doesn't exist. You could do weight, but that still feels like a little bit of a weirder thing. I guess it could be fine because, like, the significance of a unit, it's not a perfect correlation. There's going to be some very significant light units, but I don't know about that one. That's an interesting issue. So what I was going to say, though, is that no matter what your situation is when you're fighting a specific enemy regency, you as the Keltar have a mechanism by which you can proceed up the tech tree, which is by losing your own units. So you always have a flat rate of being able to progress, or a consistent rate, which is your own units being slain, which is why, again, if we make it so that you tech up faster when you lose than you do when you slay an equal number of units, you get less for slaying enemies and more for losing your own units. Some may see that as an opportunity for perverse incentives, but if you can just defeat your enemy with the numbers that you have, then the tech up doesn't actually matter that much anyway. You could just overpower them. So I don't really think that's a huge deal. Resources is too vague. I think weight is also a bit too vague. It's like anything that's a stat you can't engage with immediately. Like, really, it probably should just be numbers. Here's why I actually don't think making it numbers of enemies slain is a bad thing. Because people are going to say, oh, they're like, significantly worse against, other Keltar that are not going to train a large number of individual units. In that case, it kind of negates itself because Keltar versus Keltar, like, they're both doing the same mechanic. But say you were concerned about, like, oh, they can't tech up very fast when they're fighting against, Thruk. I'll throw, like, Cathethron, some regency that doesn't have a lot of numbers. Their tier 1 units are equivalent to like 2 or 3 tiers above what they actually could be if they were they can contend with pretty high tech stuff right out the gate. They just need money. So if you have money, that's almost like unlocking higher tier units for another regency. Like that, you're getting power equivalent to that. You already have that aspect. So I think when we consider that sort of approach, it becomes very clear, actually, that the Keltar have a built-in sort of system where they can fall back to just training more powerful units at the earlier tiers without needing to get past the enemy, like without needing to slay enemies or even lose their own units. Like, they have access to a nice host of units in the early game that can scale pretty well. Now, can they contend with like all of the early tier stuff, like tiers 1 through 5 at tier 1? Yeah, probably not. But that seems like a very unrealistic situation anyway. If you're up against, like, conversely, so the other concern is if you're up against Orthothray, Roselium, whatever, that have a large number of units, then you're going to scale up faster than, like, you'll scale up faster than other races. This doesn't matter as much either, I don't think. Because specifically, the Keltar have this, they have very expensive units and very expensive resource costs for, like, building structures and stuff. They're a very expensive race, very expensive regency. The Keltar are probably the best equipped regency to have this sort of behavior. Because if they're fighting against a regency that has a large number of units, and they kill all of those units, well, for one, kills mean less than deaths. We already talked about that. So that's like a built-in way to sort of subvert that. However, at the same time, just because you have access to tier 3 tech doesn't mean you could afford it, right? It's like an obvious truism to say. So it's especially so for the Keltar, where their tier 1 units cost like tier 3 units for other regencies. So you can only imagine the cost as you progress further up the tech tree. Now, when we talk about the inverse of that, which is the original problem that I talked about, where you're stuck at tier 1 for longer, while their tier 1 units cost as tier 3 units, perform as tier 3 units for other regencies. So yeah, they're almost like, if you are in a situation where you're up against another Keltar player or a Thruk player or something that doesn't have a large number of units, you can actually walk in as the Keltar, and you can simply say, okay, I'm going to focus on expanding. I'm actually going to focus on economy. And that economy thing is going to allow me to deploy a large number of units and then maybe like force my opponent to claim victory over my opponent that way, basically. I think that will actually work out now that I think about it. What's up, James? I assume you're talking about stuff like the risk maps or whatever. I forget what I think Command and Conquer 3 had some sort of, I think it was Kane's Wrath, but it had some sort of like global conquest mode or something. Was that what it was? It was actually called Global Conquest. Wow. Yeah, it's for the expansion. So this is basically like you have access to like a world map and you get to attack or whatever. That is not something that I have a massive sort of affinity for. If I was going to do a game mode where you played an RTS and you had access to a map like that, I would want it to be very different. Like the very fact that you're basically selecting from a list of missions. So okay, most games do that. They have that sort of thing there, and they don't have any sort of AI interactivity where the AI will like fight back or contest you in a certain area or whatever. So if you think about like StarCraft 2 Legacy of the Void, or not even just that, any of the StarCraft 2 single player campaigns, the original 3, well, you get the idea. Not the Nova DLC. Everything before that had a component where you could pick your next mission from a list of missions. That's basically what a lot of those maps are. A lot of those maps are just pick your mission from a list of missions. They're always the same mission. They're always going to be there, even if you ignore them until the very end or whatever. So there's no sort of like pressing matter. Like you must do this now. At the same time, if you do the other way, if you do what I'm saying these things don't do, and you have an AI that pushes back into that situation, and you're saying like, hey, here's this big map, here's this AI, and the AI, will try to push into your territory, and you'll push into their territory, and like there's this dynamic element, sort of like Civilization, I guess. I haven't played any of those games, but I assume it's something like that. Then it stops really becoming an RTS, and it becomes more about this like weird 4X thing where you have, I guess most 4Xs are usually in space, but it becomes more like a Civilization game where there's like a heavy element of turn-based and simulation stuff. I don't really have any interest in that. I don't see much value in that style. I think when you approach that sort of design, you're basically taking two different genres of like the simulation Civilization style game and the RTS game. You're trying to like merge the two. I feel like they are two incompatible genres. Like they have too many things that conflict with each other. Where like an RTS ideally doesn't have a bunch of weird shit affecting the starting conditions that are outside of the RTS purview itself. And the Civilization stuff has this element where you are focusing pretty heavily on how can I get the leg up before I even start the mission. I believe the original Dawn of War games, some of the expansion packs there had this exact sort of thing in this Galactic Conquest thing or whatever, where you could dictate the difficulty of a mission based on like investing weird like requisition points and stuff out of the game, like in the overhead map. It just doesn't make sense. Like as a navigational system for picking your next mission, I can see it having value. Even as a system where in Dawn of War 2, they had this situation where you would see options like basically each mission would take a certain amount of days, and each mission would take 1 day, and then there would be optional missions that would pop up that would say like, oh, this will take this will expire in 3 days. You have a small window of like 3 days to complete this mission before the objective falls or whatever you're trying to, like if it's a defense mission, the objective falls. If it's an assault mission, the objective leaves or the target leaves or whatever. As something like that, I could actually see some value in it. And then I could also see like if you consider the idea of, I wish I could just like open up the game and then navigate to the specific area so I can show you guys what I'm talking about. I'll see if I can find a screenshot. Dawn of War 2. And this is Dawn of War 2 world map or something. I don't even know what it would be called. It's like mission selection or something. This is not it. This is Dawn of War 1, some expansion pack. But it's like, okay, Dawn of War 2 mission selection, maybe? Maybe I'll find something here. I'm very surprised I'm not getting some obvious screenshot of this. But I guess we'll search Dawn of War 2 instead of Warhammer 40k, Dawn of War 2. Let's see, all. Maybe one of these guides will have it. Yeah, okay, here we go. This is what I was talking about. So you basically have like a situation where this isn't exactly what I was looking for, but there's probably something in here that... Oh, no, there isn't. Maybe I'll see something. I don't know why that guy named himself Dolph. Clearly it should have been with an A. Yeah, well, the more systems that you actually have for the player to engage with, the more confusing things can get. So you do have to be careful with that. But I think some systems just aren't very interesting. Like, I think like if every unit had ammo or whatever, that would be pretty dumb. I was about to say ammo broadly speaking, but obviously that would seem a little goofy because we have the Madcap with the manual reload. So whatever. But that's like a system that you can interact with, but it will automatically resolve itself. Okay, so in this situation, this is not an RTS, by the way. This is basically like an RTT with squads. It's basically an RPG, to be fair. It's really not. It's like a shit game, to be fair, to be completely honest. But in this game, you basically have a situation where you can pick like where you want to go. And so you can see here it says currently orbiting, and it's highlighted in red. I don't know why red, but whatever. And then you can go to Calderis instead, which is like another system. And once you're in here, I really wish I could find Down of War to mission selection. I'll search this again, and maybe I'll find some other guide that also has some of this shit. No, there's nothing there. Yeah, I don't know why there's never any information. I guess you could say like Dawn of War 2 map, maybe. That looks like a very funny map editor. That's what that looks like. No, we're still not getting anything. Oh, star map. So I guess this is sort of like what I'm talking about. Maybe if I search star map, I'll get somewhere. Like how useless all of these are. Okay, well. Anyway, you could basically pick a mission. So in this case, you'd go. There's like there's some intermediate between these two that I don't have access to. But basically, you pick your system, then you'd pick from a list of missions that are a map. There'd be a map of whatever you're orbiting, and you'd be able to look at a mission or a number of missions, and you'd basically pick. And so this is a main mission, I think. But imagine this was like a secondary. You can kind of see it in the background here. You can kind of see it. There's like some A name over here, Meridian over here, and then Judgment of Carrion over here. So you can basically pick between a number of different planets or quests or whatever to do. And you click on Judgment of Carrion, and it's like, oh, this is a side mission, and it'll expire in 2 days. So you know, oh, if I want to play this mission before it leaves, before like I can't play it anymore, then I have to play it before the end. And I don't think there was any result if you like if you did all of the side content and then ignored the main content until all of the side content was done, I don't think there was any drawback. In fact, I think you were encouraged to do that because of the weird grindy war gear system that they had. But what I would do is, if I was going to incorporate something like this, I would make it so that you'd pick between doing the main mission as easily as possible or doing the side content for some other benefit. But again, this introduces a whole bunch of extra systems that I'm not 100% sure I would ever want to do, because you're talking about systems that are intercepting RTS gameplay before you start the mission and changing a bunch of shit. But if I was going to do it, that's how I would do it. I'd say I'd make it so that the enemy strengthens their position by having an extra AI player if you wait an extra day. You know, they set up more defenses, right? So they call down another player, a commander or whatever. I would make it something like that. Basically, so there's a drawback to doing this other mission. And then that means that the other mission would have to give you something else. I don't really know what you would do besides... Yeah, I don't know what... I haven't even thought about that because it's like so weird. I guess it could be like extra, like starting resources or something. But that's basically the main idea, is all that shit. It's like, that would be the only reason that I would imagine having a map. Now, if you just wanted to have the map for navigational purposes and you didn't want to have that side content that could expire, the time-sensitive content, you could just say, fuck it, okay, I don't want any time-sensitive content, but this is my mission selection menu, basically. And you could do something similar to Antioch Chronicles 3 Thoughts in Chaos, which I'm pretty sure I can actually show you. What's up, Mr. 1, Spamification? First playable alpha build of Cause Monarchy. I have nothing to push, don't worry, go ahead. First alpha build of Cause Monarchy. So the plan is that, like, we just started working on pathfinding the day before yesterday. Or no, it was yesterday, actually. We just started working on pathfinding. That's a pretty key system. We're going to work on AI later. I think we'll have a playable alpha that, again, doesn't have any of the new races or anything, but at least has, like, RTS mechanics and stuff with basic networking that we might need to overhaul later. We should have something playable by the end of this month or, like, first week of next month or something. And, again, it'll be using all, like, third-party assets and stuff. We won't have any of our own art in there. But it'll be, like, a sort of... we're only a couple months into development right now. So, yeah, as Veek mentions, about 1 month for an RTS engine demo. I would say it's probably less than a full month, though, at this point. But maybe I'm wrong. We might hit a snag somewhere. However, for the Cause Monarchy retail game in the Xibalba universe, I think a year is probably a fair assessment. Probably less than a year for that, because once I'm done planning all of the units, all of the tech maps, all of this stuff, like once I'm done planning all of that, I'm pretty sure that we can just comfortably move on to, I just got to find my thing here. So yeah, we can pretty comfortably move on to like full art production and like focusing on mission development and stuff. And that's probably in the next 2 or 3 months. So yeah, it should be pretty solid actually. All right, so this is what I was talking about earlier. If you were trying to do a star map thing for mission selection, you could do something like this. Obviously, in this particular case, the project is no good. But they did something like this instead of a traditional in a menu, pick your mission. We might do something similar to this. I don't know. I haven't given it supreme amount of thought. There you go. But yeah, to more directly answer the question of how long for an alpha build, less than a year, I would say. Now, I can't promise the graphics will look all that great in less than a year, but we will have actual graphics, and a lot of them will probably be made by me, which means they will look very, very goofy and will be replaced at my earliest convenience. What this has taught me above all else is that people who say that it's too hard to make your own engine and make your own RTS are just full of shit. Unsurprisingly. Okay, speaking of being full of shit, I did say I was going to actually do some work today. Yeah, it literally is ripped Brood War graphics, actually, along with a bunch of other games. The difficult part really is that, like, so I don't know if you're somebody who's played the Brood War mod, which is what this project started as. But like the biggest issue is definitely that we don't have, like, we have limitations on how many units we can have, how many unique data entries we can have, how many units in game we can have, selection, all this other stuff. So yeah, we definitely want to provide better than that. The reason why we need it to not be third-party assets when we make some sort of public mess about it or a song and dance about it is because this is mostly from a moral thing. I don't actually think there's a legal precedent here. There might be. I might be wrong about that. I'm not a lawyer. But I would not feel comfortable getting a lot of buzz and any sort of mind share off of the back of using other people's work, other people's visual art. And even though it would say everywhere, like, this art is not reflective of what the final art will be, or whatever the fucking line would be, they would still be seeing, they would be viscerally engaging with something that is not ours in terms of the visuals. And I'm pretty confident that the game is going to pull people in regardless of what the art looks like. So I would rather all of the art, even if it's really bad beta art, be ours instead of being third-party placeholders, because then my conscience is clear and I don't have to worry about, like, these other indie developers that I ripped their graphics from this game without their permission. And they were very nice about it, actually, when they found out. They were actually quite excited that I had done it because it meant more advertising for them. But these guys, I just took their art. I'm also using them for basically like marketing work, like trailer for my game or something, So yeah, first impression is very important. We won't be doing early access or anything like that. Yeah, players being your testers, that's a good one. I have no compunctions with outsourcing the testing work to trusted individuals who have been with the community for long enough for me to get a sense of how committed they are and how, like, what their standards are and all that other stuff, right? And we have a decent number of those people. We could always use more, but we have a decent number of those people already. But yeah, the idea that you're releasing a product, and it's not just like fans of the game or something, it's literal consumers, like customers, are playtesting your product for you. This is a bit fucked, But we'll see. We'll see how it all goes. But eventually we will have some very exciting art passes. I have been in talks with a couple of artists that I know, trying to negotiate some sort of situation where we can maybe use some of their work, even if it's just placeholder. I know what you mean by that comment, Veek, but it is kind of funny to think about, like, it's kind of funny to think about, like, I don't know. It's like, it does not matter until it matters. It just feels somewhat tautologist. Like the idea of this thing not mattering until everybody agrees that it matters. That's true, though. It's just funny. Nothing thinks until it am. I think Socrates said that. What's up, Beaver Man? I am trying to think of a name for my arena of sorts, my altar of storms. No, I can't name it Warcraft 3. Hey, that's not the only point. The other point. Oh, yeah, never mind. It is the only point. Fuck. No, I didn't mean to close that. Wow, what an idiot. Oh, I actually don't even remember. There you go. Now I remember. If I was hunting for some sort of icon that looked like it was a ceremonial hall of sorts, I wonder what I would pick. I guess probably that. I already used that for Psychora, but it looks sufficiently barbaric. I guess there should actually be two ends, huh? Will cause monarchy support ray tracing. That's funny. I don't really see what the hubbub is. I guess if your game is targeting like super realistic aesthetics or whatever, it might be useful. I guess it could be useful for reflections and stuff even in this, but yeah, I don't know. Saying stuff about ray tracing is like saying stuff about ultra wide, you know. Shambler has shambled in. Hello, homie. Back to Keltar today. What's going on with you? I think the maximum, I think the camera view zoom level will be locked. At least the upper bound will be locked. I don't really see much of a value in zooming in, to be honest. Pretty hard to control. In shambles. I hope not. Yeah, I think he was just talking about keeping visual quality high or something. Oh yeah, this is where I was thinking of using something like Trophy Room as a name, wasn't I? I should pull up my names document. I already used the Thuzalon. I know where that is. No Battle Lord. We'll call it the atrium for now. Oh, it's useful. I'm just not really 100% sure whether it should be like it's obviously it changes the balance of the game, right? I think that's probably my main concern, if you will. All right, James. That sounds like an epic time. I haven't had lobster, I don't think ever. Maybe once. Not usually seafood. But good night, man. Speaking of new technology that's debatable as to its utility, how do you guys feel about pathfinding? New technology for us. By the way, in my demonstration week, I noticed that there were some bugs where units would just stop trying to find paths. Don't know if you can target some fixes for that one. Lobster and bake is the new hottest shit. It's something. Imagine zooming out to freeze the game so you get a draw instead of a loss. Just raging. As long as we have a way to snap back to the default zoom, the full HD zoom, I don't really have too much of an issue with zooming out. I think the concern that I had with it was mostly that computers that can run at higher resolutions will be able to have a competitive advantage over users playing on computers that cannot do that. And I also think it kind of just adds a ton of overhead anyway. So I think we'll probably stick with a locked full HD resolution screen space, but maybe we'll find ways to make it so that it's not terrible. Oh, I see. Yeah, you have to actually make unit-to-unit collision happen. That would be how you would fix it, by the way. It has to happen regardless of our woes, our performance woes. I guess you could just keep ordering the unit repeatedly or something instead, which is probably what Brood War does. Oh no, Brood War doesn't even do that. Brood War will occasionally get stuck too. But they try a little bit harder. I think just figuring out that you should path around a unit is probably fine though. There's some implementation that will do it, even if we don't know it yet. So I know that I want the ceremonies to occur in a specific way. Yeah, that could work, I suppose. I can't make it energy because anything that interacts with energy would bust this system wide open, wouldn't it? So I think what we'll do is we'll make it so that there's a passive gain no matter what, and that additional atriums will precede the tech unlocking process faster. You'll still need at least one atrium, no matter what, to unlock your stuff. That's kind of interesting. No, bone ritual is what I'm calling the ceremony that occurs when a unit is slain by Keltar or when a Keltar is slain. So basically, the way that Keltar actually progress through the way that they progress up their tech tree is going to involve basically having, like, they have to finish these ceremonies in order for that to occur. And my thinking is that you would have a passive gain, a passive progress bar on the atrium, which I guess I can refresh now because it's here. It doesn't have the ability. It'll be broken right now because I didn't finish writing it. I guess I can just push this, what I have now, and talk some shit about it. So I didn't notice that they also pathfind, but they have obstacles of each other, which I guess aren't considered obstacles yet. So yeah, the Keltar, the Bone Ritual basically unlocks additional tiers of tech for them. So the Atrium will unlock tier 2 tech by itself, I think, but I'm not actually sure. I guess we'll have to rename the unit as well. We'll say Ceremonial Hall. So my concern is that I'm trying to find a way to like encompass the core idea into a single concept. So that's kind of tough, isn't it? Like into a single sentence. It's pretty difficult to wrap all that up. Oh well, you'll be able to see the sort of how close it is to completion just by looking at it, basically. So I was thinking that each ceremony will the cleanest implementation I can think of is that each ceremony completed will unlock a new tier of technology, which means you can build a bunch of atriums, but they will passively take a while to get to the point where they, huh? I guess we could make it so that for each, so is it the atrium, enhance the Keltar War Machine, unlocking additional tiers of technology for each atrium. This process I don't know by how much, but it'll say is hastened for each additional atrium. Enemies slain and I don't know if it should be allies or own units, but I'll say allies. each enemy slain and each ally lost. Greatly contributes to this process. Because that's basically the main way that you're meant to go about progressing. You're mostly meant to slay enemies. Losing your own units counts for more than individual slain enemies, but you have way less units than as the Keltar than you do than your enemies tend to. So slaying enemies is your primary sort of mode of doing that. However, you can go with the economic route just by building more atriums. That's my thinking. No, it's a global effect. The concern that I think the slain things the things you've done before building an atrium will count, but I don't know about that. I guess the town center could be the atrium. That way you don't have to worry about building it, but when you expand, you also account for it, which is a nice little way of having that, actually. That just makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? I think if it's your town center, then the more you expand, the more you naturally get down this process. Yeah, I think that makes sense. I guess the concern is that if I wanted to separate their tech out, like if I wanted to divest their economy game from their tech game, I'd have a tough time doing that. But I wouldn't really. I would just make it so that it's more economically viable to yeah, I think that just makes a lot of sense. So I think what we'll do here is we'll if we go to Kentoric, we'll just rename this to Atrium. I think that makes sense. And if we jump to Backbone, we can say it was made by Atrium. And that way also, if you have tiered town centers, so you have like a tier 3 town center or something, it would also contribute. Yeah, I think we can actually just get rid of that. What was that icon anyways? Like 443 or something? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. Oh. That's the danger of... Oh, I also had listed it as an Antikythera unit, apparently. Pretty good. All right. Oh yeah, I didn't... Hold on. Okay. So yeah, that means the atrium also has to have the ability, which is Keltar, Bone Ritual. So I think we should get more specific with the numbers now. That's like the next step. We'll say ceremonies. Each active atrium. Each atrium provides. I guess we could say ceremonies I don't know if it'll be a flat thing or if it'll scale. So like each, um, if you get tier 2, the process to go from tier 1 to tier 2 takes less time than going from tier 2 to tier 3. I feel like that on the one hand it makes sense, but on the other hand the resource cost is already going to be there. So I think just having a very standardized rate is probably the best, rather than worrying about getting confused in that respect. So we got ceremonies, we got tiers of technology. I think it's probably fine for them to all be the same duration, and we can sort of revisit based on that. So we can say that's 5 minutes. We might up it to 10. I'm not sure. I have to think about that. I don't know how much an expansion should take off. I'm also kind of... The other kind of confusing aspect is like, if you just build a town center, and then if you lose a town center, does that set you back 30 seconds? If we were going to use 30 seconds as the example, that would be 10%. That would be a fair, reasonable amount. I could see that happening. If you lose all town centers, you probably got bigger problems, but assuming you're able to rebuild, do you lose all progress? I think if that's the case, we definitely got to make this 600 seconds. So that'll be 5%. Man, this is pretty crazy to write. I think I'll have to have the town center related stuff be separate from the stuff about accelerating it. Yeah, so if you only ever have one base, it will take 10 minutes. Every expansion you make knocks 30 seconds off. And obviously there's like the passive time ticking of time. So if you expand 2 minutes in, if you expand twice by 3 minutes, which is pretty fast, especially for Keltar, you would get a full minute off. And that means that instead of being 3 minutes in, you would actually be 4 minutes in to your 10-minute counter. Slaying a unit would drop 1 second. Losing a unit would either drop 2 or 3. Probably 2. And that would be your main way of accelerating. I think specifically atrium. I actually kind of like that idea better, Shambler, just because of the concept that it reinforces the idea of combat. But yeah, I think that is actually better. Each ceremony takes 600 seconds to complete and unlocks a new tier as long as a single atrium remains intact. Okay, so that's what we'll call that. I don't. I had this whole conversation earlier, but I think you were playing a game while I was talking, so you probably didn't internalize it. Resource costs for Keltar units and structures are enormous compared to other regencies, and their individual technology is like tier 3. It's like 2 or 3 tiers above the same tier technology for another regency. So if I have a tier 1, I've said this before, if I have 5 tier 1 Keltar units versus 5 Ansifi tier 1 units, the Keltar units are winning that fight. Like, unless some fucking crazy micro happens, it just A move talking. We're just talking A moves, and they're both combat units. Keltar wins every time without fail because the Keltar units are just way fucking better. They're also way more expensive. So that's just a default trait. Now, if you factor in the idea that, oh, I'm up against a high unit count regency, okay, I might get access to 3 or 4 tiers of tech, but if I don't have 5 bases, I'm not going to be able to field a lot of those units, and therefore I will remain vulnerable. Likewise, if I'm up against a low yield, low unit regency, then for one, I still have the opportunity to increase the value of individual slain enemies and lost allies by building additional atriums in the first place, like Shambler suggested. But beyond that, I also just can train tier 1 units and compete with up to maybe tier 2 or 3 of the opponent. So it really comes down to what the player wants to do. But the Regency itself is equipped with the tools. Before I even decided to start trying to figure out what the approach would be for this particular, like, essentially when I was trying to come up with a way to form the ideas here into a single concept, like, yeah, that would have been pretty tough, actually. But the Regency already had tools available for me to use for balancing, in that they already have really expensive stuff. So yeah, it's the same thing as if you like. Basically, you don't get the resource cost trade-off of spending all of your money on a dispatch into a weather vane, into a trove, into a ministry. But as the Ansifi, like, the same thing happens if you get a lot of tech, but you don't have the money to actually deploy it. It doesn't matter how much if you have all the octagons and, well, I guess there's the tech structure, all the domains, all of the Titan halls in the world. If you don't have the money to train the units that structure trains, you're going back to the gallery, homie. You're going back to the captaincy, going back to the fulcrum. Bye-bye. And that's basically how it works, is like, you might have access to tier 5 production facilities or tier 10 units. You don't got the money, it doesn't really matter. So that's how I plan on balancing it. I think it'll balance itself. What do you mean by too much AoE? I'm kind of confused as to how that relates. This is still kind of not very specific language, but I wanted to make it so that it's your specific unit. Well, the atrium's Ken is the same thing as the same Ken. The point is that this structure, the Keltar have to be of this player. You could theoretically have a player there's actually plans for this. One Ken controls has multiple taskmasters or whatever I decide to call the they won't be called taskmasters, but the commanders, the regents of Keltar. So I guess we could say Atrium's regent. Actually, that would be pretty That would be pretty obvious, pretty clear. In this case, slain was just to mean die in combat. It wasn't to mean specifically killed by you. But slain enemy is all right. Let's try that. So this would very easily allow you to tick down the timer based on number of atriums, but also allows you to get an incentive and progression towards. So it mandates combat in order to tech up, which is unique to the Keltar, but does so without removing the opportunity to influence the tech up process by way of going for an economic boost. It says tiers remain unlocked as long as a single atrium remains intact. Yeah, because the atrium, I mean, maybe this actually won't happen, but my thought process was that atriums themselves don't actually unlock anything initially at tier 1, but the ceremonies unlock stuff. Therefore, the atrium should somehow persist that. Basically, if there's no point in keeping an atrium alive, it feels a bit weird. But now that's leftover thinking from when the atrium was meant to be a structure that had no purpose other than the ceremonies. Now it's a town center. So I guess that actually doesn't need to be the case. What the fuck? I deleted something somehow. Not really sure what happened there. So yeah, I actually so the atriums will still provide value without the ceremonies at all, but yeah, I guess that's fine. Okay. I think that's pretty good. I can't see too many reasons to radically change that, basically. So I suppose the question then is, originally you did lose every tier from the atrium, but the reason why that was not, that doesn't really translate very well. If you lose all of your town centers, you probably lost the game. If you, even in cases where you did lose all of your town centers but could rebuild the town center, that's your top priority anyway. And the tech just unlocks the structures. It doesn't unlock units from the structures. I guess in some cases it would. But basically the idea that it would be impactful to lose access to the tech tiers is pretty slim. I feel like that idea is very slim. I don't actually think that would ever happen. Like, yes, obviously in a world where there's a million games played, at some point that decision would be impactful. But if you've lost all of your town centers, you have way bigger problems than not having access to tech. Now, the tech centers themselves, you're right to say that the tech progression ceremony thing feels like an upgrade in that it is fire and forget, but I don't really see how removing, like, because the structure is attached to because the ceremony is attached to a town center, how does it make sense that by killing the town center you have success? Okay, the only case that this would ever make sense is if you have eliminated all town centers, but your opponent has a lot of money and can not just rebuild the town centers, but can not only can they rebuild the town centers, they can also build other things. So okay, this is a bit of a change of pace. There are other town centers that will exist. The atrium is just one of them. Other town centers will probably not have the ceremonial aspect to them. Therefore, if you decide to expand more cheaply, you can do so at the expense of not getting additional tech security and, what do you call it? So there would be a way where I could design an interaction where you could actually lose the tech, but well, I don't see how you would have a system other than all or nothing. What would the system be? Every atrium you lose reduces the tier? Because then you're actually not encouraged to build extra atriums whatsoever, I don't think. You would probably want to keep only one atrium if that was the case, because that's a very punishing loss. The counter argument is maybe atriums go down in time cost, and you can just build a lot of them. But I don't know, man. That seems pretty... It seems like it's unnecessary extra complication. Now, I guess you could criticize the core concept of the ceremony in the first place and say that it actually doesn't work in an RTS context. I actually don't know if that's the case, because obviously we haven't tried anything like this before. But I'm not 100% sure where we would go with this. I'm kind of confused about your one ceremony per atrium thing. Are you suggesting that if I have 3 atriums, then they're progressing up tiers 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and 3 to 4 simultaneously? Because that's pretty fucking confusing. It doesn't... That wouldn't work at all, because if you lose the structure that's producing tier 1 to 2... If you unlocking tier 2, and what happens to your next one? I guess instead of producing it, it would just produce a ceremony. And when the ceremony was completed, you would go up a tier, instead of it being an explicit tier that you're going up. That's still very confusing at its face. I think every regency will have tiers to their town centers. The idea that I had was that a town center might train advanced workers instead of having, like, or have some other bonus to it instead of doing the atrium or whatever. Well, no, I think you need to have... I mean, obviously, to unlock tier 2, you need it to be on... Well, you suggested simultaneous progression, unless I misread your sentence, so I'm kind of confused. Yeah, the atriums thing, it's definitely a system that needs a lot of thought put into it. It's very strange. I don't want to have like a million different sub interactions. I feel like it's already kind of overcomplicated just looking at these two things. No, Vik is pointing out a valid criticism that if you don't have a way for counterplay to stop the... So basically right now, with the current proposed system, if there's no punishment for losing an atrium, or losing all atriums, or whatever, you... If there's no way for counterplay to happen, you have no way to kick a Keltar back earlier in the tech map. Now, I disagree with that. I think it's kind of fallacious to say that, because reducing access to resources effectively does kneecap their tech. Like, it stops them from actually being able to use their tech to anywhere close to the same degree. But the criticism on a systems, if I can take Vik's initial complaint and form it into a criticism that actually applies to a systemic aspect of the game, it's that you have this fire and forget aspect where as soon as you cross a threshold of getting past the ceremony breakpoint to unlock tier 10, you no longer have any reason to build additional atriums, right? And because of that, there's also no way that the opponent can ever stop you. Whereas all of the other cases, you have a way to fight them. Well, no. You losing Keltar increases progresses the timer. I guess I could make it so that losing Keltar decreases the timer. Like, it adds to the timer, I should say. Regresses the timer. But the idea that I had was that when you lose a Keltar unit, you get progression. But I guess it could be the inverse. That could be the counterplay. But even then, it's like, if they're stuck with a long timer, eventually you will get to a point where tier 10 tech arrives and you can't do anything. to stop them, to gate them. Now, by the time you've reached tier 10, battles are very much probably going to be a one and done thing. Like, I can't really imagine at tier 10 tech losing your base and then rebuilding, which might just be a fundamental issue with the concept of these tiers. Or might, like, maybe it's not actually something that's within the scope to care about. Because, like, if you have enough resources, maybe you should be able to progress back up, but... Well, you wouldn't regress. It would just increase the duration of the process. So the ceremony would take longer if you were knocked back or whatever. I think losing units regressing you is very confusing because the whole thing turns into a weird game of chicken. I think the simplest way to resolve this issue is kicking you back a tier when you lose an atrium. But that also introduces its own sort of issues, so... You would just really want to protect your atriums, which is fine. But at that point, it feels a bit like it's a very loaded concept, right? Well, no, because if the timer is paused, that only matters before tier 10. At tier 10, you don't have any impact from this system at all. So this is the current proposed idea. Where each ceremony is 600 seconds, the highest tier above tier 1 becomes locked when an atrium is lost. And then you have this where you... So you can choose to play safely and only have one atrium, but your progression will be kneecapped by that. And you'll need to... I actually don't know if it's possible. I suppose I could give them a tier 1 expansion, like a tier 1 non-atrium town center or resource depot, if I wanted them to... Yeah. Basically, the idea is that you can choose whether or not you want to expand a lot and risk losing your tiers, but get the benefit of teching up faster, or, you know, do you want to play it safe, only have a couple atriums, and then expand with other structures for the rest? Somebody drop the dish. Yeah, so basically you would go for a spine spire if you wanted to grab a resource node. Oh, I guess the Earth Mound is listed as a resource node, which is fallacious. I was thinking about a hyperfile structure that would also serve as a resource node. Seems like a funny meme. Doesn't really make sense, of course. Could be funny. I guess the Critter campaign did that, actually. Okay. So now we have stuff. Now we have things. Now we have some idea of what the Keltar progression will look like. It's still a bit hazy as to I definitely think the combat based aspects of it are really important, and the idea that you can augment that with the extra economy by building more atriums, but that there's a risk associated with that is pretty good. The system does feel kind of complex. I'm going to say that right up front. I'm not 100% sure how to, like, everything that I'm running through my head to try to explain it to a layman who's never even, if I had to explain this to somebody who didn't understand, like even somebody with a basic idea of RTS, like they know that you build units, you build structures, you fight other units, you harvest resources, you tech up. And I said, here's a region, here's a race. We don't use complex words like regency when we're talking to people who don't know what the fuck we're talking about. We'd say, here's a race. In order to tech up, you have this town center that completes a ceremony every 10 minutes. But you can hasten this by killing enemy units and also losing units of your own. And those units, those kills and deaths matter more the more town centers of this kind you build. It feels very convoluted. Oh yeah, by the way, if you lose one of your town centers of this kind, you go back a tier. It's like there's a lot going on. It feels very messy. I don't know if it's possible to streamline it without losing some critical aspect of what we are after. Originally, there was no passive gain, and instead it was just that you must kill units or lose units. So we could make it so that that's actually the way, and that the body counts are, say, I don't know, 100 per tier or something. You kill 100 enemy units to unlock tier 1, and then lose an atrium, you lose a unit. That might be something. I don't know what the exact number would be. 100 is just an example. But the lose a unit, then that counts for 2 units or something. I don't know. Like I don't 100% know. And then obviously each atrium would mean that each individual enemy slain would count for more. So yeah, it's kind of tough. It's kind of tough to think about that. So I'll have to think about it, but it feels too complicated right now. That's what I'll say. But hey, we did that. That's pretty cool. Only took us an hour and 40 minutes, Frank. So I'm going to take a quick break, and then we'll probably have a very short session after my break where I maybe we'll continue working on this, but other than that, we'll be working on um, maybe some more general ideas for the Keltar or something. So stay tuned, and I shall return. BRB. That might be the longest BRB of the season, boys. Sorry about that. Got dadded. You know how it is. Take a look at what you guys had to say while I was N. And by N, I mean gone. Mechanicus OST, best music for late nights. I don't think I've even seen that. Viker sent me a very long message about this. You missed the whole discussion about the ritual system for the Keltar. Also, yes, we have pathfinding, as Veek mentions. So Veek proposed a different system where when an atrium, so each atrium would only be able to satisfy a single ceremony. So a ceremony, so an atrium, so your starting atrium, for example, would progress from tier 1 to tier 2. And then you would never have a system, you wouldn't be able to then progress additionally from that atrium. But that atrium would visually look distinct because it would be done. And so that would be a valuable target at that point. That is a cleaner system than what we have here, because basically that would mean that you would need to at least expand 10 times. Well, no, you would need to build at least 10 atriums. That's the biggest issue there. You would need to build at least 10 atriums in order for the ceremony to work, right? That's probably the biggest problem there. So what I would propose is an additional higher tier structure that can stack 2 ceremonies or something. But then even that has limited utility because this is a finite. It can scale up a finite number of times. Yeah, it would be 9 atriums. You could scale up a finite number of times because you can only get to tier 10. I guess it might still be better, though. It might still be a superior system. Now, the big concern that I have is the whole simultaneous tech progression thing. Well, if you lose an atrium, you lose an atrium that has completed its ceremony. You lose a tier of tech, as opposed to, like, say, I've got to tier 2 with my home atrium, and that gets destroyed, so I lose tier 2, but not tier 3. That wouldn't happen. It would just lose 1, whatever the highest tier of tech is, above 1, you would lose. So the highest tier above 1 becomes locked when an atrium is lost. This is still true in Veek's proposed alternative system. So each atrium would only be able to complete 1 ash ritual. Each ash ritual will unlock a tier of tech. Each atrium with a completed ash ritual that is lost would lock the highest tier of tech at the time of losing the atrium. And then each atrium you construct, maybe bone trophies, instead of being tied to the number of atriums, are tied to a different structure. Or, well, no, what I mean is the multiplier related to bone trophies. Maybe that is tied to a different structure instead of it being each atrium counts for more or whatever. But I think the biggest concern is that the simultaneous progression. That feels very weird. You basically have some sort of like trophy room or something that would multiply the, or a trophy hall, I guess it would be. And each one of those would be like expensive, but provide the bonus and maybe some other thing. Like it would probably be a specialized production facility or something, I guess. And it's kind of confusing though. So the current overhead of the system, I don't. So Veek's implementation doesn't actually change how complex the system is. It just removes the edge case of like completing multiple rituals per atrium and then not losing that number of tech. Like we could basically do the same, we could resolve the same issue of like in the currently proposed system that we have on the website. If I have two atriums and I got all 10 tiers of tech unlocked based on those two atriums because I killed a bunch of units or lost a bunch of units or whatever, that would mean that if I lose both of those atriums, I only go back from tier 10 to tier 8 because I only lose 2 tiers of tech. That's Veek's complaint. Now, if we instead store the number of rituals completed in a given atrium, and then you lose all of those completed rituals, there's an incentive then to create additional atriums and store additional redundant completed ceremonies, as a buffer. That way, if you have like, a high value atrium or something, that might not be your only one or something like that, I guess. That is a messy system still, I think. The attractive element is that each atrium can only provide one ceremony, one tier of tech. That's the attractive element of Veek's solution. The problem is that I think the problem is that I guess the simultaneous progression is already there in this system. It's just not acknowledged. So the simultaneous progression is already here because if you have multiple atriums, then each one of them is progressing up with another ceremony. So yeah, there would be some visual tell the like number of ceremonies that have been completed, like an additional big, funeral pyre particle or something, is what I was thinking. Like some very obvious visual tell, like the number of pyres that are lit on a given atrium would dictate. But it's obviously a lot easier visually to just have one single large pyre that starts to like smoke and progressively blacker, if you will, or more intensely. And then the pyre itself lights on fire when it's finished, right? So it'd be this like conflagration that would be very obvious. Because the Keltar have this like built-in fear of fire that I want to kind of emphasize as well. So I'm trying to think about that as well. I don't know if we want the storage thing. Like the storage thing is kind of messy. It does create higher value targets for enemies, but it's not exactly something you can control as a player. Like wherever you start, you in skirmish mode, you'll be able to pick your starting location, for example. So you can technically control where your town center is placed at the beginning of the map. But if you it does feel a bit weird that like some of them would just be way more impactful to lose or keep alive than others. I think it would be much cleaner if there was a consistent element to, like, if this atrium has a burning pyre, you know the ash ritual was completed, and you know it's time. You know it's a valid target if you want to lock away one of their tech. Now, what we don't have an opportunity for is like an easy way to immediately determine what tier of tech they're at based on this. Which you do have the opportunity to do so if you find a tier 9 tech structure for Ansifi or something and blow that up. You know you just locked tier 9 specifically. You don't know which tier you're locking from the atrium. So I guess we could add an additional tell to the atrium where there would be 9 smaller fires and that would be lit up in accordance with how many tiers of tech the player is currently at. And so by default, there would be no burning fires when you start because you're at tier 1. And then when you unlock tier 2, the first smaller fire would start burning. In addition to if that atrium has, and so that first smaller fire would burn for all atriums that are finished constructing. And then if you're at tier 2, and then you get, so if your atrium that you have hasn't finished its ceremony yet, but another atrium has, then it would have the first small fire lit, and then its main fire would light when its ceremony is done. So we could do something like that. Well, then you have to have 9 different colors. This is pretty hard to remember, I think. I think just a visual number of like, oh, they have 5 lit fires already. We got to like kill some of these atriums. Something like that could be pretty neat, probably. Well, the units that they have access to is fine, but they may not have trained, tier 5 tech units, even if they have access to it. So I think we need a visual to denote, like the interaction I'm talking about is if I walk up and I see a ministry, I know Ansifi have tier 5 tech unlocked, and I can, stop them. I can lock out tier 5 tech by destroying the ministry. If I see an atrium, and I don't know how many other atriums exist, or haven't scouted them all out or whatever, then I have no immediate understanding of like what tier this is unlocking. So I think the number of smaller fires in the atrium is like the biggest tell that we can probably provide. If I jump into here, I'll add. Well, even if all units did reflect the tier, you don't actually know if... oh, I need to BR. I forgot about that. You don't know if if that is the same thing as their max tier, so... Yeah, I think it's got to be more involved than that. And of course, there's going to be some cases with, there's going to be a lot of cases with other things anyway. So, all right. So let's try to fuse Veek's suggestion with our current system and find some way to make it so that it's just better in general. Atrium enhance the Keltar War Machine. So say each individual atrium enhances the Keltar War Machine by conducting a ceremony that unlocks additional tiers of technology. Okay. That's Ash Ritual. So that's Veek's suggestion of limiting the number of ceremonies that an individual atrium can complete to one. We don't talk about simultaneous ceremony progression because it's kind of taken as a given. That each ceremony doesn't refer to tier 2 tech or tier 3 tech, but that you need to complete 2 ceremonies to unlock tier 3, right? That's basically the idea. So if we go to bone trophies, we see when Keltar slay an enemy or lose an ally, their ceremonies progress by 1 second. I actually am not sure about losing an ally. This was my way of making it so that the player, do not have to specifically engage with an enemy in a team game in order to progress your tech. Your ally losing units will count for that. Well, the trouble with it being deaths of all enemies is free-for-alls or upstarts or anything to that effect. If, you know, there's a battle going on that you're not even aware of, it doesn't really make sense. I can see an argument for removing the ally thing. It's mostly a gameplay aspect where I wanted to make it so that if you're fighting with a Keltar ally, you don't have this weird incentive to okay, so when Keltar or their allies slay an enemy. All right, that makes a bit more sense. That way, well, yeah, I guess that's probably the cleanest implementation without like introducing a bunch of edge cases. So then we have to decide what we want to do about the progression multiplier. So this flat progression might not even need a multiplier. The number of atriums that you want to produce now naturally increases because each atrium is only good for 1 tier of tech. But if the progression is multiplied by the number of intact atriums, you have a further sort of, what do you call it? You have a further incentive to continue expanding. So maybe the system doesn't need anything else other than what we have here. Yeah, that might actually be all we need. Well, the Psychora thing with building is a bit rough, to be honest. I actually don't know if that'll continue. I guess it's probably fine. But... I was thinking that any units that die in the range of a Keltar would make sense as well. But I kind of like the idea that your team has to be the one killing the enemy. And even then, killing is like not as much of an impact as losing a Keltar unit. Well, realistically speaking, the idea of it being allied vision instead, I think the concern with it being allied vision means that you could, like, if I'm designing the Psychora to limit their capabilities based around the idea that you have, so if there's a super early unit that another Regency can use to gain vision, then the Psychora are no longer limited and bound by the same rules they used to be. Where suddenly this ally has access to a quick hover unit, whereas the Psychora hover units are slow or expensive. So he could just quick, or a quick air unit or something. But I guess the more I think about it, the less sense it really makes, because, well, the idea of that their units and structures are altering the fabric of this reality is fine. You could make it so that they also confer this bonus to allies by way of their technology sharing or something. I don't know. I was thinking something related to that too, Shambler, that the trophies should be like a resource of some kind, but that also feels pretty rough. That feels kind of like the StarCraft 2 co-op stuff, I think. I suppose I could also make it so that well, they actually have faster build durations than other units. Than other regencies, I should say. But they are, I guess, generally fragile. I guess the missive is not really an example of that, but that's actually one of the main concerns that I have, is that, like, if you think about it, their production facilities at the very least should definitely build very quickly, because they have to upgrade. Oh, maybe it doesn't matter as much because I went the whole route of like the tiered upgrade system instead of the reliquary being succeeded by something additional. It just gets replaced by a tier 4 production facility. We had that talk a while ago. So yeah, maybe that can be addressed later. The thing about the Psychora passive requiring vision of their allies is, or of their own units, is that it's very different to, that's like the main way that it differs from the Cathethron passive building. But the Cathethrons have build times based on distance between the source structure and the new structure. So that's like the little change there. So the Cathethrons get longer build times if they're building far away, which is how you balance the stuff there. They're also just generally going to be more expensive. So. I would imagine it would be something very simple, but maybe difficult to comprehend. Or it would be something like, for every tile, you get an extra second. And so when you're placing the structure, it would show you the... I think this would be true for all regencies. It would show you the resource and time cost. As you're getting ready to place the structure, it would show you like minus 150 minerals or 150 mineral magmite, 100 hypervials, something like that. And then for the Cathethrons, that would, like, you'd see the time cost go up and maybe get colored differently the farther away you go from the source structure. But the Cathethrons don't have the vision thing, so they can build anywhere. Even I think they have to build within vision. I'm actually not sure. They might not have to. I guess it should just be a natural thing that you should expect everything to need to be built through with active vision. But yeah, the idea was that they yeah, that's a tough one, I guess. But yeah, they don't need specifically their unit's vision. They can have allied vision do it. But it does feel a bit weird. This feels a bit weird to be limited to... I don't know about that one. Well, I feel like that's pretty rough because just allowing the player to visualize that makes it fine if it's one tile equals 1 second. The breakpoint system introduces a ton of edge cases where just by slightly moving your mouse, you're going to get fucked a lot harder. So I think Convalescence will differ from the Cathethron passive by making it so that the Cathethrons don't need active vision, but have the drawback of the slower thing, the based on distance. That's probably what we'll do. Yeah, they're generally more fragile anyway. So yeah, I don't think we need a secondary structure for the multiplier for all that. It's probably fine. So yeah, we'll just have to continue squabbling about the that stuff. Oh, I guess I didn't actually push any of this stuff. I can just stash these. And then when I pop them, I can copy their contents over. The fuck? Can you tell me why it wants me to push all of these? Question, Todd? I didn't make any changes, though. I literally just stashed everything that I had in the working directory. Very bizarre. Oh, these have been put into the... So retail 1... Thanks. There's some very hilariously fitting classical music that's increasing in tempo in the background, and as I'm like losing my mind trying to click all these things to get me to another fucking open. What? How do I open? How do I change file? What the fuck? Oh my god, why is that all the way down there? Jesus. What a mess. Okay. We're back, boys. What's the problem? Light the sacred incense. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't know what its issue is with these. Is it just pranking me? The Dreamhold folder was deleted, and then it... Oh, no, I didn't delete it. It doesn't exist, though. There's nothing in here. Oh, something is in here. I don't know what is in there, to be honest. I guess I can close Markdown thing. Is it this? I don't even know what program could be open that has it open. Well, time to find out which file it is. It's just a folder itself. No idea, homie. No clue. What does it want from me? What is this? Oh, Veeker. Isn't there a merge editor in here? All right, I'm going for it. Here we go. Copy. Discard changes. Paste. Wow, it worked. Oh, I pasted it and now it's got a fucking double space and all sorts of shit. I guess not. Yeah, I thought I had, but it's because I do these bat files and I assume they push and I forgot. Obviously, doesn't work that way. Yeah, it's pretty good. Don't worry about it. I think I got everything. If not, I can probably just go into the annals of Git history later. Well, I guess there will be a really easy metric to look at because I wrote the plan for the first mission in here. Yeah, it exists. And the tutorials, yeah, just had the change to the comment. So it seems like it has everything that I did, so it's not that big of a deal. IMO. Well, I think we've settled on a nice implementation that was very much crowdsourced to you guys in the chat. So that's pretty cool. Appreciate you guys being the sounding board and additional idea guys in this context. I think that it's quite thematic for the Keltar to be so battle focused. Like the timer of 10 minutes means that you're not gonna get it without fighting. Like you basically have to fight. So that should be very obvious, very telegraphed. You're meant to reduce that timer. So yeah, I think that part is pretty solid, pretty ironclad, if you will. There is the concern about whether or not it makes that huge amount of sense for allies to contribute, but that's one of those things where I think we just have to sort of look the other way from the perspective of an RTS, like figuring out mechanics that will work with large scale RTS, right? There's undoubtedly a way to interfere with the writing more, but I think that would actually be a net negative anyway, so. I am out of water. Officially, by the way. But I think it's time for me to take a walk. So I think I'll leave you guys with this. Some pretty cool stuff. It's not much. We changed, like visually, it just looks like the town center changed the icon and we added the spine spire. But this is big, make no mistake. And the more I develop the Keltar, this is a dangerous thing, guys. The more I develop the Keltar, I don't think I've said this very frequently. The Keltar are the oldest concept in the entire game of Xibalba, the entire game world of Xibalba. The Keltar are the oldest ones. They're the ones that I've thought of for a long time. And they're the ones that I'm probably one of like the most keen on getting them out there. Alongside the Mackerel Das, which are not as old as the Keltar, but they're also pretty close as a concept. So those two regencies are like the ones that I have a lot of personal passion for. Since I created them when I was another person, for all intents and purposes. That's how many years ago this was. But they've preserved a lot of the element of like, things that made them attractive as concepts, things that made them exciting. A lot of that has only gotten better the more I've explored them in the context of designing them for a brand new RTS environment. So the more I work on them, the more I want to immediately get work done on them. The more I want to immediately see them running around in game, and the more I want to work on campaign planning for them and stuff like that. So I guess it's a luxury that I have access to for the Keltar, that we have the order of immersive content work in our favor there. If we take a look at the immersive planning, the second full campaign is the Keltar campaign. That's pretty cool. We get to actually jump into the planning for that pretty soon, I think. But first, we should actually, continue working on the tech map, because it is true we haven't done a huge amount of work on the tier 2, 3, and so on. I would like to get at least a couple of the subsequent tiers explored. And then I would like to move on to doing the same for the other regencies. The Makreldas and the Githroven are actually the only two retail regencies we have to do tech maps for, tech map primers and initializations for, before all of the retail regencies have been done that way. And then I can decide whether I want to double down and focus on continuing to plan units for the existing retail regencies, or if I want to do the upstart initialization for the Rosellium and the Orlithray. So we'll sort of see, take a temperature check once we're there. That'll be in a couple of weeks, I imagine. But yeah, things are progressing. Vik's working on pathfinding. We got the website generation taken care of, which was a surprise twist to last week, but we still did it. So shout out to Vik for that. And yeah, ultimately just pretty fucking good stuff. I'm very excited, as always. I just can't get too loud about it because it's pretty late at night. But I'll see you boys very soon for another one of these streams. It'll probably be back with the Keltar again, because that's just how we roll. This time we'll probably be actually coming up with more concepts. And tomorrow, Vik will be doing some more of his engine development stuff. You can tune in for that if you like. And I will leave it there. Bye-bye.